The scones were burning. Vanessa Kingsley stood frozen in the kitchen of Rosewood Manor, her hand pressed against her chest where a dull ache had been building for the past hour. The smell of charred pastry filled the air, but she couldn't seem to move, couldn't force herself to open the oven door and salvage what was left of the morning's batch. Marcus would have noticed, she thought, would have gently nudged me toward the oven with that patient smile of his. But Marcus had been gone for 6 months now, and the kitchen that had once been the heart of their thriving bed and breakfast felt too large, too quiet, too empty without his steady presence. The guests who remained fewer each month since his death politely ate whatever she managed to produce, but Vanessa could see the disappointment in their eyes when they bit into underdone muffins or oversalted eggs. She finally forced herself to move, pulling the blackened scones from the oven with shaking hands. The pain in her chest intensified as she leaned forward, a sharp reminder of the stress that had become her constant companion. Dr. Martinez had warned her about this during her last checkup. Grief could manifest physically, especially in women her age. She needed to take better care of herself, delegate more responsibilities, consider reducing her workload. Easy for him to say, she thought bitterly. He doesn't understand that Rosewood Manor isn't just a business, it's everything Marcus and I built together. The kitchen timer chimed, jolting her back to the present. The coffee was ready. At least. She poured herself a cup with hands that trembled slightly, noting how the simple action now required conscious effort. When had lifting a coffee pot become so difficult through the window? She could see the October morning painting the manor's gardens in shades of gold and crimson. The roses Marcus had planted during their second year of operation were heavy with autumn blooms, their fragrance drifting through the open window. He'd always said the roses were Rosewood Manor's signature, the detail that made guests feel they'd discovered something special rather than just another commercial lodging. The phone rang, cutting through her reverie. Vanessa glanced at the caller ID and felt her stomach tighten David's number. Mom. Her son's voice carried the careful tone he'd adopted since Marcus's funeral, as if she were made of glass and might shatter at any moment. How are you feeling this morning? I'm fine, David. The lie came easily now. Just finishing up breakfast prep for the guests? Actually, that's why I'm calling. Isabella and I were thinking we'd drive up today if that's okay. There are some things we need to discuss. Vanessa's grip tightened on the phone. Over the past month, David and his fiancée had been making increasingly frequent visits, always with vague mentions of important conversations and planning for the future. Each visit left Vanessa feeling more anxious, more certain that they were building toward something she wouldn't like. What kind of things? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Just business stuff, family stuff, nothing urgent, but we should probably talk face to face. Business stuff, family stuff. The euphemisms made her skin crawl. When David was little, she'd taught him to speak directly, to say what he meant without hiding behind diplomatic language. Now he sounded like a lawyer delivering bad news to a client. I suppose that's fine, she said. The Hendersons are checking out this morning, so we'll have the place to ourselves. Good. We'll be there around 11. After hanging up, Vanessa stood in the kitchen listening to the manor settle around her. The old Victorian house had its own language of creaks and sighs, sounds that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 30 years. Marcus used to joke that the house was talking to them, sharing its secrets and stories from the decades before they'd rescued it from decay. Now the sounds felt ominous, like warnings she couldn't quite decipher. She made her way to the front desk to check on the Hendersons' departure. Mrs. Henderson was already packed and waiting in the lobby, her husband loading their car with the efficiency of people who'd been traveling together for 40 years. Thank you for another wonderful stay, dear, Mrs. Henderson said, pressing a generous tip into Vanessa's hand. "Though we do worry about you managing all this on your own. Have you considered bringing in more help?" The question, innocent enough on the surface, felt like a judgment. Vanessa forced a smile. "I'm managing just fine. The work keeps me busy." "Which is good, Mrs." Henderson's expression grew concerned. "Busy is one thing, dear. Overwhelming yourself is another. You look tired." "I'm fine," Vanessa repeated, hating how defensive the words sounded. After the Hendersons left, Vanessa found herself alone in the Manor's lobby, surrounded by the antiques and family photographs that told the story of Rosewood Manor's transformation from derelict house to beloved destination. She and Marcus had put their hearts into every detail: the hand-painted murals in the main hallway, the carefully curated collection of local art, the photo albums filled with pictures of returning guests and their families. The pain in her chest intensified, radiating down her left arm in a way that made her pause. She sat down heavily in one of the wing-back chairs by the fireplace, trying to breathe through the discomfort. Stress, she told herself. Just stress from anticipating whatever David and Isabella wanted to discuss, son. But as she sat there, waiting for her son to arrive with news she suspected would change everything, Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that this morning, this quiet October morning in the kitchen where she'd burned the scones, might be the last normal moment she'd have at Rosewood Manor. The clock on the mantel chimed 10:30. Half an hour until David arrived. Half an hour to prepare for a conversation that felt like it might determine the rest of her life. Outside, the roses continued blooming, indifferent to human anxiety and change, but their beauty, which had always comforted her before, now seemed fragile and temporary, like everything else she'd thought was permanent in her carefully constructed world. David's BMW pulled into the circular driveway at exactly 11 o'clock, its pristine black paint gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Vanessa watched from the front window as her son emerged from the driver's side, straightening his expensive suit jacket with the careful attention to detail that had served him well in his corporate career. Isabella followed, her dark hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, her tailored dress and low heels suggesting someone dressed for a business meeting rather than a family visit. They looked like a matched set. Vanessa thought with an unexpected pang of loneliness. Young, successful, polished in a way that made her acutely aware of her own flour-dusted apron and graying hair. When had her son become such a stranger to her mom? David said as she opened the door, leaning in to kiss her cheek with the same careful politeness he might show to a client. "You look—" He paused, studying her face with concern. "Are you feeling all right? You seem pale." "I'm fine," Vanessa said automatically, then stepped back to let them in. "Isabella, you look lovely as always." Ooh. Isabella smiled, but there was something strained about the expression. "Thank you, Vanessa. How have you been managing? David's been worried about you." The comment, delivered with apparent concern, felt like criticism disguised as care. Vanessa led them to the sitting room, noting how Isabella's eyes swept over the space with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating assets rather than admiring a home. "I've been managing perfectly well," Vanessa said, settling into her favorite chair. "Rosewood Manor practically runs itself at this point." David and Isabella exchanged a glance quick, but not quick enough to escape Vanessa's notice. Her stomach clenched with anticipation. "Actually, Mom, that's what we wanted to talk about," David said, his voice taking on that careful, diplomatic tone again. "Isabella and I have been discussing your situation, and we're concerned—" "My situation." The words came out sharper than Vanessa intended. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Isabella leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Vanessa, we know how much this place means to you, how much you and Marcus put into building it, but running a bed and breakfast is incredibly demanding work. even for someone half your age. I'm 62, not 92, Vanessa snapped. Of course, David said quickly. But you've been under tremendous stress since Dad died. The grief counselor said it's completely normal to feel overwhelmed during the first year. You talked to my grief counselor. Vanessa's voice rose in disbelief. That's confidential information. David, you had no right. I was worried about you, David said, his composure cracking slightly. Dr. Martinez called after your last appointment. He said your blood pressure was elevated, that you seemed confused about some basic questions. He recommended that I consider reducing my stress levels, Vanessa interrupted. Not that I hand over my life's work to people who don't understand what it means. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Isabella's carefully controlled expression faltered for a moment, revealing something that might have been hurt. We do understand, Isabella said quietly. That's why we want to help. David and I have been talking about taking on more responsibilities here, giving you the chance to focus on the parts of the business you enjoy most while we handle the day-to-day operations. What parts of the business do you think I don't enjoy? Vanessa asked, her voice dangerously quiet. David shifted uncomfortably. Well, the financial management, the marketing, dealing with suppliers and maintenance issues, all the stress stuff that's been wearing you down. You mean all the important stuff? All the stuff that actually matters for keeping this place running. That's not what we meant, isn't it? Vanessa stood up abruptly, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through her chest. You want to turn me into some kind of figurehead? Don't you keep me around to bake cookies and arrange flowers while you make all the real decisions? Isabella's composure finally cracked. That's not fair. Vanessa, we're trying to help you. You can't possibly manage all of this on your own anymore. Look at yourself. You're exhausted. You're losing weight. Mrs. Henderson told us you forgot their anniversary dinner reservation last week. The betrayal of that final comment hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Mrs. Henderson, one of her most loyal guests, had been reporting on her to David and Isabella. How many other people were watching her, cataloging her mistakes, building a case for her incompetence. So this is an intervention, she said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. You've all decided I'm too old, too confused, too much trouble to be trusted with my own business. Mom, please. David's voice cracked with emotion. I love you. I don't want to see you work yourself to death trying to maintain something that's become too big for one person to handle. Your father and I managed it just fine for 30 years. But Dad's gone now, Isabella said gently. And you're trying to do the work of two people while dealing with grief and stress. And don't... Vanessa's voice was ice cold. Don't you dare use Marcus against me. He would never have wanted this. He would never have wanted his son to swoop in like some corporate vulture and strip away everything we built together. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Tell me, David, what exactly are you proposing? That I sign over power of attorney? That I make you and Isabella equal partners in the business? Or are you suggesting I retire altogether and let you two run things however you see fit? The silence that followed was answer enough. Vanessa saw the truth in their faces, the carefully rehearsed arguments, the legal documents probably already prepared, the assumption that she would be grateful for their intervention rather than furious about their presumption. The pain in her chest was getting worse, spreading down her arm and up into her jaw. She pressed her hand against her ribs, trying to massage away the discomfort, but it only intensified. I built this place, she said, her voice shaking with rage and something else, fear. Maybe. Or the growing certainty that her body was betraying her at the worst possible moment. I painted these walls. I planted those gardens. I learned every guest's name and remembered their preferences and made them feel like family. This isn't just a business to me, it's my life, my legacy, my... The pain struck like lightning. sudden and overwhelming. Vanessa gasped, doubling over as her chest exploded in agony. The room tilted around her, David's voice seeming to come from very far away as he shouted her name. She was falling, the Persian rug rushing up to meet her, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Isabella's face, not calculating or cold, but genuinely terrified, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached out to break Vanessa's fall. "Call 911. David was screaming. "Call 911 now." But Vanessa couldn't respond. Couldn't tell him that she understood now why he'd been so worried, why everyone had been watching her with such concern. Her body had been trying to tell her for weeks that something was wrong, and she'd been too proud, too stubborn, too afraid of appearing weak to listen. As consciousness slipped away, she felt David's hands on her face, heard Isabella's voice giving their address to the emergency dispatcher, and realized with crystalline clarity that the conversation they'd come to have about her future, about Rosewood Manor, about who would make decisions for her life had been answered in the most brutal way possible. Her body had made the decision for all of them. The leather seat beneath Vanessa felt cold against her skin. Though she couldn't remember getting into David's car, her mind felt wrapped in cotton, thoughts floating just out of reach like smoke in still air. Through the windshield, gray buildings stretched toward an overcast sky, their windows reflecting nothing but emptiness back at her. "This is where you'll be living from now on, Mom." And David's voice cut through the fog in her head, clinical and detached, as he pointed toward a stark concrete structure ahead. The building loomed against the horizon, all harsh angles and utilitarian lines. Nothing like the warm brick facade of Rosewood Manor with its climbing ivy and welcoming porch. Vanessa blinked, trying to focus. "I don't understand." Her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely a whisper above the car's humming engine, from the back seat. Isabella's voice carried the sharp edge of finality. "Rosewood Manor belongs to us now. Vanessa, the papers are already filed." She leaned forward, her manicured fingers gripping the seat back. "You can't manage a business in your condition." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Vanessa turned to look at her daughter-in-law, taking in Isabella's perfectly styled black hair, her tailored blazer, the way she held herself like a lawyer delivering a verdict. Which, Vanessa supposed with growing horror, she was... What condition? Vanessa's heart began to race, a flutter against her ribs that felt like bird wings. David, what is she talking about? Her son's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the black leather. "You've been struggling, Mom, since Dad died. The doctors think it's best if you have professional care." The words felt like ice water in her veins. Professional care. Like she was a broken appliance that needed servicing, not a woman who had raised this ungrateful child, who had built Rosewood Manor from nothing but dreams and determination. Memory fragments swirled through her mind, the morning she'd burned the scones, the chest pain that had been building for weeks, David and Isabella's concerned faces as they'd tried to discuss her situation. But why couldn't she remember what had happened after their conversation? How had she ended up here, docile and defeated in the passenger seat of her son's car? "I built that place," Vanessa said, her voice growing stronger. "Your father and I, we started with nothing. Remember the early days? David, you used to help us plant the roses out front. You said they smelled like happiness." Something flickered across David's face. Pain, maybe, or regret, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "That was a long time ago, Mom." 6 months. Vanessa whispered. "Marcus has been gone 6 months, and you're already erasing us." The car pulled into what looked like a parking lot, though the lines were strangely wide and marked with numbers that seemed more suited to loading zones than visitor spaces. The building loomed closer now, and Vanessa could see people in white coats moving behind the windows. David turned off the engine, and the sudden silence felt deafening. "Mom, I need you to listen to me." His voice carried a weight she'd never heard before, as if each word cost him something. "This isn't about erasing you. This is about keeping you safe." "Safe from what?" The question burst out of her, louder than she'd intended. "Safe from yourself," Isabella said coldly. "You left the stove on 3 times last week. Mrs. Henderson called us worried sick because you were wandering around the garden at 3 in the morning in your nightgown. You asked the mailman if he'd seen Marcus." Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Vanessa tried to remember, tried to grasp the truth, but her memories felt slippery, unreliable. Had she done those things the stove? She remembered making tea, but had she turned it off the garden at night? She sometimes walked there when she couldn't sleep, when the emptiness of the house without Marcus became too much to bear. "I was grieving," she said, but the words felt weak even to her own ears. "You were dangerous," Isabella replied. "To yourself, and potentially to the guests. We couldn't risk the liability." Before Vanessa could respond, the car door opened, and David was standing beside her, his face carefully composed. "Come on, Mom. Let's get you settled." Vanessa looked at the building again. Really looked this time. The architecture was wrong for a senior living facility, too institutional, too sterile. The windows were too high, too narrow, and there, by the entrance, was a sign she couldn't quite make out from this distance. But it looked official, medical, perhaps. "I'm not going in there," she said. David's expression softened, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to cry when she left him at daycare. "Mom, please. I know this is hard, but it's for the best." But before Vanessa could protest further, she found herself walking toward the building's entrance. Her overnight bag, when had David packed that clutched in her trembling hands? The automatic doors slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss, and she stepped into a world that smelled of disinfectant and something else. Something that reminded her of the hospital where Marcus had spent his final weeks. "Mrs. Kingsley." A woman in white looked up from behind a curved desk that gleamed under fluorescent lights. "We've been expecting you." "Expecting you?" As if this had all been arranged in advance, as if David and Isabella had been planning this moment for weeks or months while she grieved her husband and tried to hold on to the life they'd built together. But then, something unexpected happened. Another woman approached, older, with kind eyes and silver hair, wearing not a medical uniform, but a simple blue cardigan. "Hello, Vanessa," the woman said gently. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I've been hoping to meet you. Your son told me so much about Rosewood Manor. It sounds like a wonderful place." There was something in Dr. Mitchell's tone that made Vanessa look at her more closely. Unlike the receptionist or the other staff members, Sarah didn't speak with the practiced cheerfulness of someone addressing a patient. She spoke like one person talking to another, with genuine interest and respect. "It is wonderful," Vanessa said, surprised by how much she wanted to trust this stranger. "Or it was before." Sarah nodded understandingly. "Before family members started making decisions about your life without consulting you." The words were so close to Vanessa's own thoughts that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes, exactly." Sarah glanced around the sterile lobby, then leaned closer. "You know, I take my breaks outside. There's a lovely garden area behind the building, much more peaceful than these fluorescent lights. Would you like to see it?" Vanessa looked back toward the entrance, where David's car was already pulling away. He hadn't even said goodbye, hadn't looked back to see if she was all right. The betrayal cut deep, but Sarah's offer of kindness felt like a lifeline. "I'd like that very much," Vanessa said. As they walked toward what Sarah promised was a garden, Vanessa felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced since Marcus's death hope. Perhaps this place, whatever it was, wouldn't be the prison she'd feared. Perhaps there were still people in the world who saw her as more than just a problem to be managed. She just had to figure out why her memories of the morning felt so fragmented, and why the pain in her chest seemed to have disappeared completely. The cottage sat beside a small lake like something from a fairy tale, its weathered shingles and climbing roses so perfect they seemed almost unreal. Vanessa stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, her overnight bag clutched in her hands, hardly daring to believe that such a place could exist so close to the institutional nightmare she'd escaped. "How did we get here?" she asked, turning to thank Sarah, but the doctor was nowhere to be seen. Strange, she'd been right there just a moment ago, helping Vanessa out of what had appeared to be a taxi, but now looked more like a maintenance van parked at the road's edge. No matter, Vanessa was free, and that was what counted. She approached the cottage slowly, taking in the details that made it feel like home, despite being completely unfamiliar. Window boxes overflowing with late-season flowers, a porch swing that swayed gently in the breeze, the kind of front door painted in cheerful yellow that invited visitors to knock and stay for tea. "You must be Vanessa." The voice came from a woman emerging from what appeared to be a small cafe attached to the cottage's side. She was younger than Vanessa, perhaps 50, with curly auburn hair and flour dusting her apron. Her smile was warm and uncomplicated, the kind of expression Vanessa remembered from her own face in the early days of Rosewood Manor. "I'm Grace Holbrook," the woman continued, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dr. Mitchell called ahead and said you might need a place to stay for a while." Relief flooded through Vanessa so powerfully she had to steady herself against the porch railing. "She did, I wasn't sure. I mean, I can pay rent, though I'll need to access my accounts." Grace waved away her concerns. "We'll figure all that out later. Right now, you look like you could use a cup of tea and a proper meal. When's the last time you ate?" Vanessa tried to remember. The morning felt like it had happened to someone else. The sequence of events leading to her arrival here blurred together in her mind. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Well, that settles it. Come on inside." And the cottage's interior was exactly what Vanessa had hoped for, cozy without being cluttered, lived in without being messy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. The furniture looked comfortable rather than fashionable, the kind of pieces that invited you to curl up with a book and forget the world outside. Grace bustled around the small kitchen, putting a kettle on and pulling ingredients from various cupboards. "I hope you don't mind my asking, but Dr. Mitchell mentioned you'd had some family troubles. Nothing too serious. I hope—" The understatement was so enormous that Vanessa almost laughed. "My son and his fiancée decided I was incompetent to manage my own life," she said. "They took my home, my business, everything, and tried to have me committed to some kind of facility." Grace paused in her tea preparations, her expression growing serious. "That's terrible. I'm so sorry. The worst part is that David used to be such a sweet boy, thoughtful, considerate. I don't know what happened to him." "Marriage can change people," Grace said diplomatically. "Not always for the better." As Grace worked, Vanessa found herself studying the woman's movements. There was something oddly familiar about her, though Vanessa was certain they'd never met. Perhaps it was simply the comfort of being around someone who understood hospitality, who knew that sometimes the most powerful healing came through simple acts of kindness. The tea was excellent, a blend Vanessa didn't recognize, but that tasted like comfort and possibility. Grace served it with homemade shortbread that reminded Vanessa of her own baking, though she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt motivated to spend time in the kitchen. "So," Grace said, settling into the chair across from her, "what's your plan?" Vanessa realized she hadn't thought beyond escaping the facility. I suppose I need to figure out how to get my life back. Rosewood Manor is legally mine, half mine. Anyway, Marcus and I owned it jointly, and I never signed anything giving David power of attorney. Rosewood Manor, Grace repeated. That's the bed and breakfast up north, isn't it? I think I've heard of it. Supposed to be lovely. Pride warmed Vanessa's chest. It was. We built it from scratch. Marcus and I. Started with this old Victorian that was practically falling down. Turned it into something special. 10 guest rooms, each one decorated with period antiques. I used to make fresh scones every morning, and Marcus would tell stories about local history during happy hour. It sounds wonderful. You must miss it terribly. More than I can describe. Vanessa's voice grew thick with emotion. It wasn't just a business. It was our life's work. Our legacy. I thought I'd be running it until I was too old to climb the stairs. Grace leaned forward, her expression intense. Then why don't you— What do you mean? I mean, why don't you go back if it's legally yours? If you never signed anything giving up your rights, then David can't just take it. There must be ways to fight this. The idea was so audacious that Vanessa felt dizzy considering it. I wouldn't know where to start. David has lawyers, resources. I'm just one old woman with an overnight bag. You're not just anything, Grace said firmly. You're a businesswoman who built something from nothing. You're a survivor who raised a child while running a company. You're stronger than you think. Something in Grace's tone reminded Vanessa of Marcus, the way he used to encourage her when she doubted herself. You can do anything you set your mind to, Nessa. You just have to believe in yourself. Besides, Grace continued, you wouldn't be starting from scratch. What if you started small, built up a base of operations here, proved to everyone, including yourself, that you're perfectly capable of running a hospitality business? The suggestion hit Vanessa like a bolt of lightning. You mean, open something here? Why not a small bed and breakfast? Maybe just 2 or 3 rooms to start. You could cater to people looking for a quiet retreat, somewhere to heal and regroup. God knows there are enough people who need that kind of sanctuary. Vanessa looked around the cottage with new eyes, already envisioning the possibilities. The second floor probably had bedrooms that could be converted to guest rooms. The cafe space could serve simple meals, afternoon tea, the kind of intimate dining experience that larger establishments couldn't match. I couldn't afford to buy this place, she said, practical concerns intruding on her excitement. Who said anything about buying? What if we worked out some kind of partnership? I need help running the cafe anyway, and you need a place to rebuild. We could help each other. The offer seemed too good to be true, but Vanessa found herself wanting to believe in it with desperate intensity. You don't even know me. For all you know, I really am incompetent, like David claims. Grace laughed. Honey, I've been in the hospitality business for 15 years. I can spot the real deal from a mile away. You've got it, that combination of warmth and efficiency that makes guests feel like they're visiting family. David and his fiancée are fools if they can't see that. For the first time since Marcus died, Vanessa felt a spark of genuine excitement about the future. Not just survival, not just making it through each day, but actual possibility, growth, purpose. As if summoned by her growing confidence, the cottage's front door opened, and a familiar voice called out, Grace, are you here? I saw the car and thought, oh. Vanessa turned to see Harold and Margaret Winters standing in the doorway, their faces lighting up with recognition and delight. The elderly couple had been coming to Rosewood Manor every October for the past 12 years, and seeing them here felt like a miracle. Vanessa, dear, Margaret exclaimed, hurrying forward with her walker. We heard about your troubles with David. What a terrible thing for a son to do to his mother. Harold nodded grimly. We've been looking everywhere for you. When Grace mentioned she was expecting a special guest, we had to come see if it might be you. But how did you know I was here? Vanessa asked, bewildered. Grace smiled mysteriously. Word travels fast in the hospitality community. People who care about genuine service tend to find each other. As the afternoon wore on, more familiar faces appeared at Willow Creek Cottage. Dr. and Mrs. Patterson arrived next, followed by the Hendersons, all former guests of Rosewood Manor who somehow knew exactly where to find her. "We're not staying at Rosewood Manor anymore," Mrs. Henderson explained over afternoon tea. "None of the regulars are. Your son and his fiancée have changed everything, painted over your beautiful mural, replaced all the antique furniture with modern pieces that have no soul. It's like they're trying to erase every trace of what you and Marcus built." The news hit Vanessa like a physical blow. But it also strengthened her resolve. These people, her people, had sought her out because they understood that hospitality was about more than clean sheets and efficient service. It was about creating a sense of belonging, of being valued and remembered. "Actually," Harold said, leaning forward with interest, "when we heard about this place, we thought it might be perfect for our autumn getaway. That is, if you have room for us." Vanessa's heart swelled with gratitude and purpose. "Of course we do." "Grace, don't we have the blue room available?" Grace nodded enthusiastically. "Perfect timing. Actually, we just finished getting it ready for guests." As evening fell and their impromptu guests settled into the cottage's rooms, Vanessa felt something she hadn't experienced since Marcus's death, the profound satisfaction of creating a welcoming space, of making people feel valued and cared for. It was what she'd been born to do, and David's betrayal couldn't take that away from her. Standing in the cottage's garden as the last light faded over the lake, Vanessa made herself a promise. She would build something new here at Willow Creek, something that would show the world and David exactly what they'd thrown away. Tomorrow would be the first day of her new life. Tonight, for the first time in months, she felt genuinely hopeful about what that life might become. 3 weeks into her new life at Willow Creek Cottage, Vanessa woke each morning with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Marcus's death. The cottage hummed with quiet activity as guests gathered on the porch for morning coffee, took gentle walks around the lake, and spent afternoons reading in the garden she'd begun reviving. But there were moments, small things, really, that gave her pause. "You look wonderful, dear," Mrs. Patterson said over afternoon tea, her voice carrying an odd emphasis. "So much better than when we heard you were... well, we're just glad to see you thriving. Better than when you heard I was what Vanessa wanted to ask." But something held her back. The woman's eyes held a sadness that seemed deeper than concern about her business troubles with David. Then there were the conversations that seemed to loop back on themselves. Harold would tell her the same story about his grandson's graduation 3 times in one afternoon, each time with the exact same details and inflections. Dr. Patterson would ask repeatedly about her health, always phrasing the questions in precisely the same way. "Are you feeling well today, Vanessa? Any chest pain or shortness of breath?" "Why do you ask about chest pain specifically?" She'd responded the 3rd time he'd posed the question. Dr. Patterson had paused, a strange expression crossing his face. "Oh, just... people our age need to be careful about heart problems, especially after stress or loss." Grace, too, had been asking increasingly specific questions about her physical condition. "You're not dizzy at all, no unusual fatigue, your appetite seems good, which is encouraging." Encouraging for what Vanessa wondered, but Grace would always change the subject before she could ask for clarification. The most unsettling moment came during her 4th week at the cottage. Vanessa had been working in the garden, pulling weeds from around the roses that reminded her so much of the ones she and Marcus had planted at Rosewood Manor. The physical work felt good, grounding, and the familiar scent of earth and growing things brought back countless memories of quiet moments shared with her husband. You always loved roses, a familiar voice said behind her. Vanessa turned, her heart stopping. Marcus stood at the edge of the garden, looking exactly as he had before the cancer began its devastating work. Strong shoulders, silver hair catching the evening light, that gentle smile that had been her anchor for 35 years. "Marcus!" The word came out as barely a whisper. He stepped closer, and she could see the love in his eyes, the concern that had never quite left his face during those final months. "You're working too hard, Nessa. You need to rest." I don't understand. You're... She couldn't say the word, couldn't voice the reality that had shaped every day since the funeral. "I'm worried about you," he said simply. "This place, these people, you're building something beautiful here, but you're not taking care of yourself." Vanessa looked down at her hands, dirt-stained and scratched from the rose's thorns. When she looked up again, Marcus was gone. Just shadows and evening breeze, the scent of jasmine carrying across the water. She sat back on her heels, her heart pounding. Grief hallucinations. That's what the hospice counselor had called them, perfectly normal, especially in the first year after losing a spouse. The mind's way of processing loss, of maintaining connection when the physical presence was gone. But it had felt so real, so completely, utterly real. Vanessa. Grace appeared at the garden gate, her face concerned. "Are you all right? You've been out here for hours." Hours. Vanessa looked around, surprised to find that full darkness had fallen while she worked. The cottage glowed with warm light from its windows, and she could see their guests moving about inside, preparing for bed. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "Just lost track of time." That night, as she climbed the stairs to her room, she heard voices from the Winters room that made her pause. "How much longer do you think?" Margaret was asking in a whisper. "The doctor said it could be any time," Harold replied. "We just have to make sure she knows how much she's meant to all of us, how much good she's done in the world." Doctors? What doctors? And why were they talking about time running out? Vanessa pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more, but the conversation had stopped. After a moment, she continued to her room, closing the door softly behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed, trying to make sense of what she'd overheard. Maybe they were talking about someone else, another guest who was ill. Or perhaps Margaret's health was worse than she'd let on that would explain the walker, the careful way Harold attended to her every need. But something in their tone suggested they'd been talking about Vanessa herself, and that possibility filled her with a cold dread she couldn't quite name. The next morning brought another strange encounter. Vanessa was in the cottage's small office, working on plans for expanding their guest capacity, when she heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, she saw David's BMW in the driveway. Her heart lurched with panic and anger. How had he found her? Had someone at the facility told him where she'd gone? But when she looked again, the driveway was empty. No car, no David, just the peaceful morning scene she'd grown accustomed to. Had she imagined it? The image had been so vivid, so real. "Everything all right?" Grace asked, appearing in the doorway with a concerned expression. "I thought I saw David's car," Vanessa said, still staring out the window. Grace followed her gaze. "I don't see anything. Maybe it was just a shadow from the trees." But Vanessa was certain of what she'd seen. The black BMW, David getting out and straightening his suit jacket, the look of determination on his face that meant he'd come to take her back to the facility. "Grace," she said carefully, "how exactly did Dr. Mitchell contact you about me? How did she know you had space available here?" Grace's expression grew thoughtful. "Oh, Sarah and I go way back. We've worked together on several projects. She knew I'd be able to provide the kind of care you needed." Care. There was that word again, used in a context that suggested something more than simple hospitality. What kind of projects? Vanessa pressed. Just community outreach stuff, helping people transition through difficult periods in their lives. Nothing formal. The answer felt rehearsed, like something Grace had prepared in advance. Vanessa studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but Grace's expression remained open and friendly. That afternoon, Dr. Patterson approached her with a request that struck her as odd. "Vanessa, my dear, I was wondering if you'd mind if I listened to your heart. Just a quick check. I know you've been under tremendous stress lately, and at our age, it's always wise to be cautious." "I feel fine," Vanessa said. "Better than I have in months, actually." Of course. But humor an old doctor, would you? It would put my mind at ease." There was something in his tone, urgent, almost pleading, that made her reluctant to refuse. She allowed him to listen to her chest with the stethoscope he'd produced from his jacket pocket, watching his face carefully for any sign of concern. His expression grew puzzled, then troubled. He listened for much longer than seemed necessary, moving the stethoscope to different positions, frowning with concentration. "Is something wrong?" Vanessa asked. "Dr." Patterson removed the stethoscope slowly, his face carefully neutral. "No, nothing wrong. Just making sure everything sounds as it should." But she'd seen the confusion in his eyes, the way he'd looked at the stethoscope, as if it had malfunctioned somehow. That evening, as the guests gathered on the porch for their usual after-dinner conversation, Vanessa noticed another strange pattern. The same stories were being told in the same order, with the same responses from the listeners, Mrs. Henderson's tale about her granddaughter's wedding, Harold's memories of his war service, Dr. Patterson's description of a difficult case from his early practice, all delivered with identical phrasing and timing. It was like watching a play where the actors had memorized their lines perfectly, but forgot they weren't supposed to perform the same scene every night. "Has anyone heard from the outside world lately?" Vanessa asked during a lull in the conversation. "News, family updates, anything?" The question seemed to create an uncomfortable silence. The guests exchanged glances, quick, furtive looks that reminded her of the way David and Isabella had communicated during their final conversation at Rosewood Manor. "What do you mean, dear?" Margaret asked finally. "I mean, we've been here for weeks, but no one ever mentions phone calls from home or news from television or mail delivery. It's like we're completely cut off from the rest of the world." "Isn't that nice, Mrs. Henderson said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sometimes it's good to have a break from all that outside noise. Just focus on the peace and quiet here." But her response felt wrong, scripted. These were people who had lived full lives, who had families and interests and connections beyond this small cottage by the lake. It was unnatural for them to be so completely disconnected from their usual routines. As the evening wound down and the guests retired to their rooms, Vanessa sat alone on the porch, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the dock. The sound was soothing, but there was something about its perfect regularity that troubled her. Real lakes had variable rhythms, waves created by wind and wildlife, the irregular splash of fish jumping or birds landing. This sound was too consistent, too mechanical, like a recording played on repeat. She walked down to the water's edge, studying the lake's surface in the moonlight. It was beautiful, reflecting the stars with mirror-like precision. But that was the problem, it was too perfect. No ripples, no movement of any kind, like a photograph rather than a living body of water. Vanessa knelt and reached toward the surface, intending to disturb the perfect reflection, but her hand passed through the water without creating any splash, without feeling any wetness. It was as if the lake existed only as a visual illusion, a painted backdrop with no substance behind it. She jerked her hand back, her heart racing with a terror she couldn't name. Everything around her, the cottage, the lake, the guests, even Grace suddenly felt less solid than it had moments before, as if it might all dissolve if she looked at it too closely. "Vanessa," Grace's voice came from behind her. "Is everything all right? You shouldn't be out here alone in the dark." Vanessa turned, studying Grace's face in the moonlight. "How long have we known each other?" "Grace, what do you mean?" "I mean, how long exactly? It feels like weeks, but when I try to remember specific conversations, specific days, they all blur together, like time isn't moving the way it should." Grace's expression grew concerned. "You're tired, dear. You've been working so hard to get the cottage running smoothly. Maybe you should get some rest." But as Grace led her back toward the cottage, Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking through a dream, a beautiful, comforting dream that was beginning to show cracks in its perfect facade. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the sound of voices drifting up from the porch below her guests, talking in hushed tones about time and memory and love that transcends physical presence. And underneath it all, so faint she might have imagined it, the steady beeping of machinery that had no place in a lakeside cottage, but felt somehow more real than anything else in her carefully constructed sanctuary. Vanessa woke to silence so complete it felt like death itself. No birds singing outside her window, no gentle lapping of water against the cottage's dock, no familiar sounds of Grace moving about in the kitchen below. Even the persistent ache in her chest when had that started again had faded to nothing, leaving her feeling oddly disconnected from her own body. She rose and dressed mechanically, her movements feeling strange and weightless. The cottage around her seemed less substantial this morning, as if someone had turned down the contrast on a photograph. Colors appeared muted, edges blurred, and when she reached for the notebook where she'd been planning the cottage's expansion, her hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. "That's because it is," said a gentle voice behind her. Vanessa turned to find Marcus sitting in the chair by the window. But this time he looked different, translucent, like morning mist, but somehow more present than he'd seemed in the garden. His eyes held infinite sadness and infinite love. "I don't understand," Vanessa whispered. "You're dying." "Nessa." His voice was soft, patient, the same tone he'd used when explaining difficult concepts to David as a child. "You've been dying since the moment you collapsed at Rosewood Manor. Your heart is failing." The word collapsed hit her like a physical blow. Images began fragmenting and reshaping around her David's concerned face as he tried to explain about professional care. The institutional building that had looked wrong for a senior facility. The woman behind the curved desk wearing what she thought was business attire, but now recognized as medical scrubs. "No," Vanessa said, backing away from him. "No, I escaped. Grace helped me. I built something new here at Willow Creek. The guests came. They validated my work." "Grace is your nurse," Marcus said gently. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell is your cardiologist. The man you thought was a taxi driver, Pastor Williams, he's been coming to pray with you every day." The cottage began to dissolve around them, walls becoming transparent, furniture fading like watercolors in rain. Through the dissolving architecture, Vanessa could see the truth white walls, medical equipment, the steady beep of a heart monitor that had been the soundtrack of her imagined paradise. "The guests," she said desperately. "Harold and Margaret, the Hendersons. They've all been here to visit you. Real visitors. Nessa. But visiting you in room 314 of Cedar Valley Medical Center, not at some magical cottage by a lake. They've been taking turns sitting with you, reading to you, holding your hand while you fought to stay with us. The constructed reality crumbled faster now. The lake dissolved first, revealing the blank wall of a hospital room. The garden where she'd worked so peacefully became a window view of the medical center's parking garage. The cottage's cozy rooms transformed into the stark functionality of intensive care. "David betrayed me," she said weakly, clinging to the last fragments of her alternate world. "He took Rosewood Manor, had me committed." "David has been here every day," Marcus said, his form becoming more solid even as everything else faded. "He's barely left your side since you collapsed. He's been beating himself up, thinking your heart attack was caused by stress from his engagement announcement." Engagement announcement. The words felt foreign in her mouth. "He and Isabella got engaged the week before you collapsed. They came to tell you the news, to ask for your blessing, and to discuss how they could help reduce your workload at the inn so you could enjoy being a grandmother someday. They were worried about your health, about how hard you've been working since I died." Memory and reality crashed together like colliding waves. Vanessa remembered now, not betrayal and theft, but concern and love. David's careful questions about her health, Isabella's suggestions about sharing responsibilities they hadn't been plotting to steal her business. They'd been trying to save her life. The morning of her collapse came back in vivid detail. The burned scones, the chest pain she'd been ignoring for weeks, David and Isabella's genuine worry as they'd tried to convince her to slow down, her own anger and defensiveness, the way she'd interpreted their love as an attack on her independence. "I've been in a coma," she said, the truth settling over her like a heavy blanket. "Not a coma exactly, more like visiting. Your mind created a place where you could work through your fears about aging, about losing independence, about being a burden to the people you love. The cottage, the business you built there, it was all real to you, Nessa, real and beautiful and important." Around them, the hospital room was becoming visible, overlaying itself on the fading cottage like a double-exposed photograph. Vanessa could see David asleep in a chair beside her bed, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. Isabella sat in another chair, reading aloud from what Vanessa recognized as one of her own journals from the early days of Rosewood Manor. "They're here," she said wonderingly. "They've been here all along. David quit his job to stay with you. Isabella has been managing the inn, but not the way you imagined. She's been calling the regular guests to keep them updated on your condition, asking them what made their stays special so she could preserve those elements. She's been trying to become the hostess she thinks you'd want her to be." Through the dissolving walls of her imagined sanctuary, Vanessa could see Grace, her nurse, checking the machines that were keeping her alive. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood nearby, reviewing charts with an expression of cautious optimism. "The people who loved you at Rosewood Manor," Marcus continued, "they've been here too. The Winters drove down from Massachusetts the day after you collapsed. Mrs. Henderson has been bringing flowers from her garden every few days. Dr. Patterson has been consulting with your medical team. You haven't been abandoned. Nessa, you've been surrounded by love." "But I felt so alone," Vanessa whispered. "I know, but look around now, really look." Vanessa let her vision fully transition from the cottage to the hospital room. The walls were covered with cards and photographs, pictures from Rosewood Manor's early days, snapshots of guests celebrating anniversaries and birthdays, children who'd grown up visiting the inn and now brought their own families. The windowsill was lined with plants and flowers, evidence of a steady stream of visitors who'd refused to let her room feel sterile or impersonal. Most importantly, she could see the true faces of David and Isabella, not the cold, calculating people her fear had conjured, but two young people who were clearly devastated by the possibility of losing her. "Your heart is failing," Marcus said gently, his presence growing stronger as the last vestiges of the cottage world faded away. The doctors have done everything they can, but it's time to choose. Nessa, you can keep fighting. Try to come back to a body that's worn out and damaged, or you can let go. Come with me to whatever comes next. The choice should have been easy. She'd built a good life, raised a son who loved her, created something lasting and meaningful with Rosewood Manor. She'd been married to her best friend for 35 years, and now he was offering her the chance to be with him again, free from pain and worry and the gradual diminishment that came with aging. But as she watched David sleep in his bedside vigil, she saw the little boy who used to help her bake cookies, who'd announced proudly to every guest that his mommy made the best scones in the world. She saw Isabella, reading from her journal with careful attention, trying to understand the woman whose approval she desperately wanted but never known how to earn. "What about Rosewood Manor?" Vanessa asked. "What happens to everything we built?" Marcus smiled, understanding her concern. "Look closer, love. Really listen to what Isabella is reading." Vanessa focused on her daughter-in-law's voice, soft and careful as she read from the journal entry dated October 15th, 1995. "Today, Marcus and I planted the climbing roses by the front entrance. David helped, though he was more interested in playing in the dirt than actual gardening. I told him these roses would be here long after we're gone, that they'd welcome guests we'd never meet to a home we built with love. He said that sounded sad, but I tried to explain that it's not sad at all. It's how beautiful things continue, how love gets passed down from one generation to the next." Isabella's voice broke slightly as she read, and Vanessa could see tears streaming down her face. David stirred in his chair, reaching over to take Isabella's hand. "She understood," he said quietly, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Even back then, she understood that this was bigger than just the two of them. She was building something that would outlast her." "I want to do that," Isabella whispered. "I want to carry it forward the way she would have wanted. But I don't know how. I don't have her gift for making people feel at home." "You do," David said firmly. "You've been doing it for weeks now. The way you've been taking care of the guests, keeping Mom's traditions alive while she fights to come back to us, that's exactly what she would want." Vanessa felt her heart swell with pride and love as she watched this scene. Isabella wasn't the calculating usurper she'd imagined, but a young woman trying desperately to fill shoes that felt impossibly large. And David wasn't a traitor to his parents' memory, but a son trying to honor both his love for his mother and his responsibility to his future wife. "They'll be okay," Marcus said, reading her thoughts. "Better than okay. They'll build on what you created, make it their own while keeping the heart of it intact. That's how it should be, how you always hoped it would be." "But there's still so much I wanted to teach Isabella. So many stories about the inn, about the guests, about what made it special." "And you will teach her," Marcus said with a knowing smile. "If you choose to fight, if you choose to come back, your heart is damaged. Yes, but not beyond repair. You could have years left. Nessa, good years, with grandchildren to spoil and traditions to pass down." The possibility hung before her like a gift she hadn't dared to hope for. Not just survival, but genuine lifetime to heal the rift with David, to build a real relationship with Isabella, to see what the next generation would make of Rosewood Manor's legacy. "What happens if I choose to stay?" she asked. "Will I see you again?" Marcus's smile was infinitely tender. "When it's time, but not yet. My love, you still have work to do." As he spoke, he was beginning to fade, becoming light and warmth and memory. "I'll be waiting for you, Nessa, but not too soon. I hope. Make them work for it." She laughed despite the tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Marcus." "I love you too," Now wake up and finish what we started." The hospital room solidified around her completely now, medical equipment humming with purposeful efficiency. Through the window, she could see the real world, not the perfect stillness of an artificial lake, but the beautiful chaos of actual life. Cars moving through the parking lot, people hurrying to visit loved ones, clouds shifting across an October sky that promised rain. It was messier than her cottage fantasy, less controlled and predictable, but it was real, and it was hers to rejoin if she chose. Vanessa closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her bones. When she opened them again, she would be stepping back into a world where hearts could fail, and children could disappoint, and dreams could be interrupted by the brutal realities of mortality. But it would also be a world where love persisted beyond death, where legacy lived in the hands of those who came after, where second chances were possible if you were brave enough to fight for them. She took a deep breath, her first conscious breath in weeks, and opened her eyes to face whatever came next. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but Vanessa forced them open. The first thing she saw was David's face, his eyes widening with shock and hope as he realized she was awake. "Mom?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. "Mom, you're back." "I'm back," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but real, more real than anything she'd experienced in weeks. Isabella appeared at David's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Vanessa, we were so scared. We thought... the doctor said..." "I know," Vanessa managed, her throat dry from weeks of mechanical breathing. "I heard you reading. From the old journals." Isabella's face crumpled with relief, and something that might have been shame. "I wanted to understand. Wanted to learn how to take care of the inn the way you would want. I've been trying to preserve everything that made it special, but I was so afraid I was getting it all wrong." David was holding her hand now, and she could feel the warmth of his touch, the reality of his presence. His grip was gentle but desperate, as if he was afraid she might disappear again if he let go. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "About the engagement, about not telling you sooner, about all the stress we put on you with our worries. God, we nearly lost you, and it would have been our fault." Vanessa squeezed his hand weakly, using what little strength she had to convey forgiveness. "Not your fault," she said. "My heart was already failing. You were trying to help." "We were scared," Isabella admitted, sinking into the chair beside the bed. "After Marcus died, you were working yourself into the ground. 16-hour days, skipping meals, that cough you couldn't shake. We didn't know how to tell you we were worried without making it sound like we thought you were incompetent." The irony wasn't lost on Vanessa. In her comatose fantasies, she'd imagined David and Isabella as calculating villains plotting to steal her life's work. In reality, they'd been two young people struggling with how to care for someone they loved without damaging her pride. "Show me the ring," Vanessa said, and Isabella laughed through her tears, extending her left hand to display a simple solitaire that caught the light from the window. "We picked something classic," Isabella said. "Timeless. David said you'd taught him that the most beautiful things never go out of style." "Smart boy," Vanessa whispered. "Takes after his mother." Over the next hour, as doctors and nurses bustled around checking vital signs and adjusting medications, the true story of the past month emerged. David had indeed quit his job, but not to steal her business to maintain a vigil at her bedside. Isabella had been managing Rosewood Manor's daily operations, but every decision had been made with careful attention to preserving Vanessa's vision and values. "The regular guests have been amazing," Isabella explained. "When word got out about your condition, they started a prayer chain. The Winters drove down from Massachusetts the day after you collapsed and have been taking shifts sitting with you. Mrs. Henderson brought flowers from her garden every few days. Dr. Patterson has been consulting with your medical team about your care. They love you so much," David added. All of them. They kept telling us stories about things you'd done for them over the years, remembered anniversaries, sent cards when their grandchildren were born, kept their favorite rooms available, even when you could have charged more to other guests. The validation was overwhelming. In her fantasy world at Willow Creek Cottage, she'd created a scenario where these people sought her out to prove her worth. In reality, they'd been demonstrating her value all along through their loyalty and love. "What happens now?" she asked Dr. Mitchell during evening rounds. "Recovery," the doctor said simply. "It'll be slow, and you'll need to make some lifestyle changes, less physical stress, more help with the inn's operations, a strict medication regimen. But your heart is stronger than we initially thought strong enough for many more years, if you take care of yourself. And if I don't want to slow down..." Dr. Mitchell smiled knowingly. "Then you'll need to get creative about finding ways to do what you love without destroying your body in the process. Delegate more. Supervise rather than executing every task yourself. Train the next generation to carry on your vision." That evening, as David and Isabella prepared to drive back to Rosewood Manor for the first time since her collapse, Vanessa felt a deep peace settling over her. Not the artificial serenity of her imagined cottage, but the real satisfaction of understanding her place in the world. "Bring me the journals tomorrow," she told Isabella. "All of them, from the very beginning. I want to go through them with you. Help you understand the stories behind the stories. Every room has a history. Every tradition has a reason. If you're going to be the next keeper of Rosewood Manor's soul, you need to know where it came from." Isabella's face lit up with gratitude and purpose. "I'd love that. I want to get it right. Vanessa, I want to honor what you and Marcus built." "You will," Vanessa said with certainty. "You already are." The transformation in Isabella's demeanor was remarkable. Gone was the cold efficiency Vanessa had imagined during her coma dreams. In its place was a young woman hungry to learn, desperate to prove herself worthy of the trust being placed in her. "There's something else," David said hesitantly. "The wedding. We've been putting off all the planning while you've been sick, but we were hoping... Would you help us? We want to get married at Rosewood Manor, with your blessing. Make it part of the inn story instead of something separate from it." The request was so far from the betrayal scenario her subconscious had created that Vanessa almost laughed. "Of course I'll help. A wedding at Rosewood Manor, Marcus would have loved that. He always said the place was meant for celebrations." As her family prepared to leave, Vanessa realized that the cottage at Willow Creek, for all its peaceful beauty, had been a prison of her own making, a place where she could hide from the messy realities of aging, of sharing control, of trusting others to carry on what she'd built. This hospital room, with its beeping machines and sterile surfaces, was far less pleasant than her imagined sanctuary. But it was real, and it was connected to a world full of people who cared about her, not as a memory to be preserved, but as a living person whose story was still being written. The heart monitor beside her bed continued its steady rhythm, not the artificial perfection of her dream lake, but the actual sound of her damaged but determined heart, fighting to keep going. It was a good sound, full of possibility and stubborn hope. She was ready to go home, ready to teach Isabella everything she knew about hospitality and grace, ready to help plan a wedding that would begin the next chapter of Rosewood Manor's story, ready to be a grandmother someday, to pass on not just property, but wisdom, not just traditions, but the love that had created them. The cottage at Willow Creek had been beautiful, but it had been an ending disguised as a beginning. This was the real beginning, messy and uncertain and absolutely full of life. 6 weeks later, Vanessa Kingsley stood in the kitchen of Rosewood Manor, teaching Isabella how to make the perfect scone while David installed a chairlift on the main staircase. Her heart was mended, not perfect, but functional, and her family was whole in a way it hadn't been since Marcus's death. "The secret," she explained, watching Isabella measure flour with careful precision, "is not to overwork the dough. You want to handle it just enough to bring it together, then let the butter do the work of creating those flaky layers." Isabella nodded intently, her notebook open beside her as she recorded every detail. Over the past month, she'd filled 3 journals with Vanessa's recipes, guest preferences, and the countless small touches that made Rosewood Manor feel like home rather than just lodging. "Mrs. Chen always requests the lavender scones," Isabella said, consulting her notes. "She's arriving next week for her annual spring visit. Should I make sure we have fresh lavender from the garden?" "Always," Vanessa confirmed, pleased by Isabella's attention to detail. "And remember, she likes her tea quite strong and prefers the blue room on the 2nd floor because she says the morning light is perfect for watercolor painting." The transformation in their relationship had been remarkable. The cold, calculating woman Vanessa had imagined during her coma had never existed except in her own fears. The real Isabella was eager to learn, grateful for guidance, and genuinely committed to preserving the inn's character while adding her own thoughtful innovations. "I've been thinking about the website," Isabella said, pulling the first batch of scones from the oven. "The photos are beautiful, but they don't really capture the stories behind the rooms. What if we added a section about the inn's history? Maybe some guest testimonials about their favorite memories here?" Vanessa smiled. It was exactly the kind of idea Marcus would have loved, a way to honor the past while embracing the future. "I think that's wonderful. We have boxes of old guest books in the attic, filled with comments and drawings from families who've been coming here for decades. You could create a whole digital archive." David appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. "The chairlift is installed and tested. Mom, you want to give it a try?" The device was a concession to her new physical limitations, an acknowledgement that her heart attack had changed what she could and couldn't do. 6 months ago, she would have seen it as a symbol of defeat. Now she understood it as a tool that would allow her to continue doing what she loved without risking another collapse. "Let's see how it works," she said, following David to the main staircase. The lift was surprisingly elegant, its wood finish matching the existing banisters so well it looked like it had always been part of the house's design. As it carried her smoothly to the 2nd floor, Vanessa felt not diminishment, but liberation. She could still reach every room, still inspect the preparations for incoming guests, still be fully present in the business she'd built with Marcus. "Perfect," she announced as she reached the top. Marcus would approve. He always said we should embrace helpful technology when it allowed us to focus on what really mattered. "Speaking of what really matters," Isabella called from the bottom of the stairs, "the photographer will be here this afternoon to take engagement photos. Are you sure you're up for being in some of them?" The wedding planning had become a joyful collaboration, with Vanessa sharing stories about previous celebrations at the inn, while Isabella contributed fresh ideas about flowers, music, and menu options. They'd decided on an October ceremony in the manor's garden, timed to coincide with the peak of the autumn foliage. "I wouldn't miss it," Vanessa said. "This is going to be the most beautiful wedding Rosewood Manor has ever hosted." As the afternoon progressed, the manor filled with the kind of purposeful activity Vanessa had always loved. The photographer captured images of the family together, 3 generations connected by love and shared commitment to preserving something precious. The wedding planner took notes on table arrangements and lighting options. Mrs. Patterson arrived early for her weekend stay, bringing homemade jam and updates on her grandchildren's accomplishments. "It's so good to see you back where you belong," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into her favorite chair by the library fireplace. The inn wasn't the same without you. Dear, Isabella did her best, but there was something missing, that special warmth you bring to everything. Vanessa felt a flutter of the old anxiety. Isabella worked incredibly hard while I was sick. She kept everything running beautifully. Oh, of course she did, Mrs. Patterson said quickly. I didn't mean to criticize. She's lovely, and clearly devoted to this place. But you're the heart of Rosewood Manor. Vanessa, your presence makes all the difference. The comment, meant as a compliment, highlighted one of Vanessa's ongoing concerns. How could she step back enough to preserve her health while ensuring that Isabella felt truly empowered to make the inn her own? It was a delicate balance, requiring constant communication and mutual trust. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the gardens in shades of gold and crimson, Vanessa broached the subject with David and Isabella. I've been thinking about the future, she said carefully, about how we structure things going forward. I don't want you to feel like you're working in my shadow, Isabella. This needs to become truly yours, not just something you're managing for me. Isabella looked surprised. But I love learning from you. I want to understand everything you and Marcus built here. And you should, but you also need the freedom to innovate, to put your own stamp on things. Some of our guests will always prefer the way I did things, and that's natural. But new guests should experience your vision of hospitality, not just my echo. David reached over to take both women's hands. What if we made it official, drew up partnership papers that give Isabella equal say in business decisions, with you as senior advisor and keeper of the inn's history? The suggestion was both exciting and terrifying. Vanessa had spent 30 years making every decision about Rosewood Manor, from major renovations to daily menu choices. Sharing that control would require a level of trust she'd never had to extend before. But as she looked at Isabella's face, eager, nervous, hopeful, she realized that trust was exactly what the situation called for. Not blind faith, but the conscious choice to believe in someone else's capacity to love this place as much as she did. I think that's exactly what we should do, she said finally. Partners. Equal partners in carrying Rosewood Manor into its next chapter. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? I mean, this is your life's work. I don't want you to feel like you're giving up something precious. I'm not giving it up, Vanessa said firmly. I'm sharing it with someone who will love it as much as I do. There's a difference. The conversation continued late into the evening, covering practical details about legal arrangements and day-to-day operations. But more importantly, it established a new dynamic between them, one based on mutual respect, rather than the hierarchical relationship they'd fallen into during Vanessa's recovery. There's one more thing, Vanessa said as they prepared to head inside. The cottage. David and Isabella looked puzzled. What cottage? While I was in the coma, I dreamed about a place called Willow Creek Cottage. It was where I went to rebuild my life after I thought you'd betrayed me. She laughed softly at the memory. It was beautiful, peaceful, everything I thought I wanted. But it wasn't real. It was just my mind's way of processing fear and change. What kind of cottage? Isabella asked. Intrigued. Small. Intimate. Maybe 6 guest rooms, focused on people who needed a quiet retreat to heal and regroup. The kind of place where broken hearts could mend and new chapters could begin. David leaned forward with interest. Are you thinking about opening a second location? I'm thinking about you two opening a second location, Vanessa corrected. Something that would be entirely yours from the ground up, while still being connected to the Rosewood Manor family. We could call it our sister property, different in character but united in values. The idea energized Isabella in a way Vanessa hadn't seen before. We could focus on wellness retreats, maybe partner with local therapists and yoga instructors, create packages for people going through major life transitions. Exactly. Rosewood Manor would remain the established family destination, while Willow Creek, if we can find the right property, could serve people who need something different. Quieter, more therapeutic. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for a woman recovering from a heart attack and a young couple planning their first wedding. But it was also exactly the kind of forward-thinking project that would ensure Rosewood Manor's legacy continued to grow, rather than simply being preserved. "We don't have to decide anything tonight," David said diplomatically, "but I love that we're thinking about the future in terms of expansion rather than just maintenance." As they finally headed inside, Vanessa felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since Marcus's death. Not the artificial peace of her coma dream, but the real satisfaction of watching something beloved continue to evolve and thrive. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning that painted the maple trees in brilliant scarlet and gold, Vanessa Kingsley stood in the garden of Rosewood Manor, watching her son marry the woman who had become not just a daughter-in-law, but a true partner in preserving the family legacy. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. Isabella wore her grandmother's pearls and a dress that complemented, rather than competed with, the Manor's Victorian elegance. David looked handsome and nervous in the suit Marcus had worn to their own wedding 36 years earlier. The guests, a mixture of family, friends, and longtime inn regulars, filled the garden's wooden chairs with warmth and celebration. "Dearly beloved," began Pastor Williams, the same minister who had officiated at Marcus's funeral, "we are gathered here today not just to witness the union of David and Isabella, but to celebrate the continuation of love, legacy, and family tradition." As the couple exchanged vows they'd written themselves, Vanessa felt Marcus's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. Not the translucent figure from her coma dreams, but the warm certainty that love persisted beyond physical presence, that the values they'd built together were being passed on to worthy hands. "I promise," Isabella said, her voice clear and strong, "to honor not only you, but the legacy of love and hospitality your parents created here, to build on their foundation while making space for our own dreams and innovations." David's vows echoed the same themes: respect for the past, excitement about the future, and gratitude for the lessons his parents had taught him about creating a life of meaning and service. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled guests was joyous enough to wake the dead, or at least, Vanessa thought with a smile, to make Marcus proud wherever he was watching from. The reception that followed showcased everything Isabella had learned about gracious hospitality. The menu featured Vanessa's recipes prepared with Isabella's own creative touches. The decorations honored the manor's history while reflecting the bride's personal style. Most importantly, every guest felt welcomed, valued, and part of something larger than just a wedding celebration. "This is how it should be," said Harold Winters, raising his glass during the toasts. A new generation taking the helm while honoring everything that came before. Marcus would be so proud. "He is proud," Vanessa replied, surprised by her own certainty. "I can feel it." As the evening progressed, Vanessa found herself in conversation with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had become not just her cardiologist, but a friend. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked. "Not just physically, but emotionally. This is a big transition, sharing control of something that's been your whole life. It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time," Vanessa admitted. "But I'm learning that holding on too tightly can kill the thing you're trying to protect. Isabella brings fresh energy and ideas that this place needs. My job now is to be a resource and advisor, not a controller." "That's very wise. And your heart. Any regrets about choosing to fight instead of letting go?" Vanessa considered the question seriously. During her coma, Marcus had offered her the peace of joining him in whatever came after death. Some days, when her limitations felt frustrating or her medications made her tired, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. But then she would see Isabella confidently handling a difficult guest situation, or David proudly showing wedding photos to visitors, or receive a letter from someone whose life had been touched by their hospitality, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This is where I belong, for as long as I'm needed." Later that evening, after the last guest had departed and the cleanup was complete, 3 generations of the Rosewood Manor family sat on the porch sharing stories and planning for the future. "I found a property," Isabella announced, pulling out her phone to show photos. "About 20 miles north of here, an old farmhouse on a lake, just like you described from your dream. It needs work, but the bones are good, and the setting is perfect for the kind of retreat center we discussed." The images took Vanessa's breath away. It wasn't identical to the cottage from her coma fantasy, but it captured the same sense of peaceful possibility. A place where broken people could come to heal, where new chapters could begin, where the hospitality legacy could expand beyond Rosewood Manor's established traditions. "Willow Creek Cottage," she said softly. "What do you think?" David asked. "Too ambitious, too risky." Vanessa studied the photos again, then looked at the young couple whose partnership had already transformed Rosewood Manor in subtle but important ways. Isabella's attention to detail had improved their online presence and attracted younger guests. David's business experience had streamlined their operations without sacrificing personal service. Together, they had the skills and vision to make something special out of that old farmhouse by the lake. "I think," she said slowly, "that your father would tell you to follow your hearts. If this feels right to you, if it excites you and scares you in equal measure, then it's probably exactly what you should do." "Will you help us?" Isabella asked. "Not as the boss, but as an advisor, someone who understands what it takes to turn a dream into reality." "I wouldn't miss it," Vanessa replied. "But this time, it's your dream to build. I'll be there to offer support and advice when you need it. But the vision, the decisions, the mistakes, and the triumphs, those all belong to you." As they continued talking late into the night, planning and dreaming and building on the foundation that Marcus and Vanessa had created, Vanessa felt a deep satisfaction settle into her bones. This was what legacy really meant, not preserving something in amber, unchanged and unchanging, but nurturing it to grow and evolve while maintaining its essential character. The cottage at Willow Creek had been a beautiful prison in her dreams, a place to hide from change and challenge. The real Willow Creek would be something much better, a launching pad for the next generation, a testament to the power of love and hospitality to heal and transform lives. The heart monitor that had been her constant companion for months was gone now, replaced by careful attention to diet and exercise and stress management. But she could still feel her heart's rhythm, steady and determined, marking time not for the years she'd lost, but for the years still ahead. Years to watch David and Isabella build their own legacy. Years to welcome grandchildren and teach them about roses and scones and the art of making strangers feel like family. Years to see Rosewood Manor continue evolving while staying true to its founding principles. Standing in the garden where Marcus had planted those first roses 30 years ago, where their son had just pledged his love to a woman who understood that hospitality was a sacred calling, Vanessa felt the circle completing itself, not ending, but beginning again, enriched by everything that had come before and full of promise for everything yet to come. The roses bloomed on, indifferent to human drama, but somehow eternal, their fragrance carrying across the evening air like a blessing on all the new chapters about to begin. She was home. She was needed. She was exactly where she belonged. And somewhere in the gentle October breeze, she could swear she heard Marcus's voice, proud and loving, whispering the words that had sustained her through the darkest days of her recovery. "Well done, Nessa. Well done."